In times of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. I gave you a little bit too much truth, and now I must be silenced. Banned by Facebook, banned by Instagram, and now the media says Louis Farrakhan is far right. What? They obviously banned Farrakhan at the same time to give them the excuse that this wasn't political. It was totally political. This is nothing less than election meddling. Everyone Facebook has banned was instrumental in getting Donald Trump elected. This is punishment. This is a political purge. This has nothing to do with hate or violating terms of service. Russians buy a few Facebook ads. Leftists. This is horrendous. This is election meddling. Democracy is at stake. Facebook bans most of the people who helped get Trump elected. Leftists and boomers. A private company can do what it likes. The creepiest thing is not the bans, it's the threat that anyone else will be banned for talking about the people who were banned. That's chilling. That's giant corporations enforcing their own communist Chinese-style social credit system. And leftists love it. I was given no reason whatsoever for being banned by Facebook or Instagram. So I'm dangerous. Someone who makes meme videos laughing at social justice warriors. Or is handing the power to decide who gets to have free speech to a handful of giant politically partisan corporations dangerous. What's more dangerous? They put me on a list with terrorists, human traffickers, and serial killers because I criticise modern art and modern architecture, because I dare criticise mass immigration, because I dare criticise a belief system. Yet you still host Antifa accounts which threaten to assassinate the president. You still host accounts belonging to the sicko who sent death threats to Ben Shapiro's family. This is truly clown world. And notice how the media were tipped off over an hour in advance of me getting banned. The same media that's been lobbying for conservatives to be silenced, censored and deplatformed for the past 2 years. There are barely any real journalists left. They're all activists, abusing their power, working hand in hand with big tech to eliminate their competition. When are we going to see any kind of sensible regulations or laws to stop this? They're now removing people's ability to have bank accounts and credit cards because they have the wrong opinions. They're literally trying to remove your right to buy and sell. This is biblical. No right to commerce unless you have the mark. And what is the mark? Total intellectual castration and obedience. So this looks like it's the end. I'll still be at summit.news while that exists. While I exist, as my entire purpose for existing is snuffed out. While society is handed over to deranged, infantilized crybabies who think hate speech is challenging their stupid opinions. Hysterical, authoritarian clowns have seized control of the new public square, and conservatives did nothing to stop it. The Trump administration did nothing to stop it. You thought it would stop at Alex Jones. You think it's going to stop at me. You think it's going to stop at Facebook accounts. They even demanded YouTube remove Ben Shapiro. They want your bank accounts. They want your home. They want you disappeared. If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter.
Socialism is on the rise.
'Cause they need to speak.
Despite being responsible for the deaths of over 100 million people.
Such secrets you keep.
The full collapse of the Soviet Union, the crumbling nations of North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela.
There's nothing left.
The totalitarian police state of China. Socialists are coming out of the shadows. They're claiming virtue and moral superiority. I think it's horrifying enough just to watch the spoils of global socialism from the safety of our own borders. But this isn't a distant problem anymore. Our two great oceans that have always protected us, they don't insulate us anymore. It's already infiltrated our government. It's dismantled our values, brick by devastating brick. I talk to people all the time. They'll say, oh, we don't have anything to worry about. It can't happen here. The Constitution will save us. I mean, the founders, they created a system specifically designed to protect us from things like this. Really? Really?
Such secrets you keep. And now
Does anybody even know the Constitution anymore?
that there's nothing left.
There couldn't be a Lenin here, or a Mao, or a Castro. Yeah, well, that's exactly what those people said.
That there's nothing more
Hitler wasn't Hitler
that remains.
until he was in power, killing people. Stalin wasn't Stalin until he got power and started killing people. And what do both of those systems have in common? Socialism.
All that remains is you.
What if I were to tell you that the socialists that we're talking about, that we're watching every day, they don't need a violent revolution to seize power? The coup that they are plotting would be completely legal. It would be operating within the boundaries of our own system. This isn't some made-up plan. This has been planned decades ago. I told you once that the masks would eventually come off, and they have. The New Left, the progressives. Now, they're now openly calling themselves socialists, even democratic socialists. And their plan is entering a very dangerous endgame stage. How do I know this? We found a document that was smuggled into the United States through the Iron Curtain in 1960. Then it was just lost. Nobody paid attention to it. But it describes exactly what's happening to us right now in great detail. My researchers found it again. We'll begin to show it to you tonight. It's the blueprint of how to legally and within the framework of our own system take over a country and flip it. It was originally written as a communist victory report. But I have to tell you, as my staff and I read it,
The secrets you keep.
it chilled us to the bone.
They tell me what's wrong.
We see it for what it is,
The secrets.
a roadmap to socialism. A warning from the dead.
Hello, America. Thank you for watching. Tonight, I'm going to share with you a piece of history that you most likely have never heard. And when I finish, tonight, you will see what is happening to our country and on the news every single day, and you will see it, I believe, in a whole new light. But that's when you will have a choice to make. Each of us will have to, after you see this special, say, do I dismiss this? Do I mock it? Do I investigate? Do I double my efforts to do my own research and my own homework? And then if I find it to be true and accurate, warn as many as can hear my voice. Unfortunately, most people are going to dismiss. And really not for any other reason than human nature. Human nature is an interesting thing. Sometimes human nature is funny. Sometimes it keeps us alive. It's our instincts and our reflexes and reason. But other times, it can lead to our death because it is telling us something that isn't helpful. The most dangerous yet really necessary human trait is the one that we've spoken about many times before. It's called the normalcy bias. This is a mental state people enter when facing a disaster. It makes people shut down and not see what is usually highly unlikely. Sometimes the line between life and death is so small that it seems impossible to notice. And it comes from our brain in order to keep us alive in the long run. Our brain does amazing things. And The normalcy bias helps us each dismiss those very high impact but low probability events that change the world or change our life. A good example is what happened in the towers of 9/11. Those people that, when those planes hit those towers, that went back to their office just to turn off their computer or shut off their lights or grab their purse, they never made it out. While the same people who were just in the next cubicle, who immediately ran for the exits, they survived. They recognized something horrible could happen. The others saw the towers and went, it could never collapse. What could possibly happen? And you know what? We see this in every single disaster film. One of my favorites is from the Poseidon Adventure.
We're going to keep settling deeper and deeper. We may even go under before we get up to the bottom to cut our way out. But it's something to try. It's a chance. We might make it. If you stay here, you'll certainly die. We are staying with the Mercer.
I remember seeing this, and it always seems so obvious in the theater. I mean, when you're watching a movie in the theater, you're thinking to yourself, hey, really not a good idea to leave that shaft that runs from the surface right directly to the core. You know, we see it coming. Somehow or another, they didn't. Here's another one. If everyone is going to die, if you die, then perhaps you shouldn't go yourself to the big red tree. But the normalcy bias stops even the most unbeatable from making stupid moves that dismiss the unthinkable. What we're talking about tonight is unthinkable. But it comes from a place where we say, it can't happen to me. It can't happen here. I'm different. No. We're different. It's different this time. I've seen this in my own life. When I went to New York and I spoke to all of the financial experts before the banking and auto industry collapse in 2008, everybody said I was a nut. They all told me, no, Glenn, you don't understand. There's systems in place that will prevent a collapse. But when I would ask them, really, what are those systems? Nobody really could explain them. Nobody understood those systems. They all had trust in a system that they no longer really understood. It really boiled down to they hadn't seen a collapse. I mean, the stock market, everything was historically pretty stable since 1929. And so they didn't believe it could happen. But just as past performance does not guarantee future results in stock returns, our future is not guaranteed by what has happened in the past. It is our actions, or in some cases our inactions, that make those past catastrophic events much more likely. I'm going to give you a couple of ground rules before we begin. First of all, the words communist and Nazi. We're going to try not to name call anybody. We've got to stop throwing around these terms with such regularity because they don't have any meaning anymore. Everybody's either a Nazi or a communist, and that's not true. If I were somebody who actually wanted the Nazis or the communists to make a return, I would encourage people to make that word a common descriptor for every kind of behavior in society because it would weaken the impact of those labels when real signs of trouble were in sight. So we're not going to use those words unless they are true and total descriptors of a person, a group, or a policy. I also don't want you to watch this special and take anything I say as gospel. Do not take it as true because I said it. I want, in fact, I insist that you take what I share with you tonight and begin your own research. I want to be wrong. But I can promise you that what comes next will look very much like what I'm going to show you tonight if we all don't wake up to the true warning signs that are right in front of each of us. Time is running short. Trouble is coming. And you know what's amazing to me? I don't care if you're left or right. Everyone feels it. No matter what side of the political aisle, we all know it. You know, Donald Trump, he's going to be a totalitarian dictator. Barack Obama, he's going to be a totalitarian dictator. What does each side have in common? They see that we could lose our freedom. And it's incumbent upon each of us right now to do an honest search and inventory of the facts and face the truth, even if it's the truth we don't wish to accept. But we so often get angry, and anger stops the brain from using logic. If I were your enemy and I needed to defeat you, I would get you to react with anger. I'd do everything I could to make you angry. Anger triggers fight or flight, and neither of those help. In fact, they'll only assist in our quick demise. You need to be level-headed and ready to engage with reason and logic. That's why I'm going to show you this tonight. And one more thing. There are going to be a ton of people that tell you that I am just a fearmonger, that I don't know what I'm talking about, I don't have a college education, or a million other reasons not to listen to this warning. I am not going to assign a motive to anybody who will tell you that. But I want you to know, the only reason for me telling you these things is because I believe them to be true. And without a course correction, we will all suffer the same fate as those who came before us. I'm also going to ask you to subscribe to The Blaze. I made this free so it could be seen by as many people. It's taken us about 2 months to do this research and put this program together. We are currently on the backbone of Facebook and YouTube. Our very own Steven Crowder is about to lose his YouTube platform for unbelievable reasons that I don't think are accurate. But voices are being silenced. And I ask that if you find any value in this tonight, you please support us. But the most important thing is do not fear. There is nothing to fear. There is, however, a lot to do, a lot to study, and a lot to save. But before we move forward, I really have to kind of take you back. I have to take you back to this chalkboard. If you remember, while I was at Fox, this is the chalkboard that came from the prediction of the caliphate that everybody mocked. It was during my last year at Fox, and I remember saying to my producer, Stu, we die on our sword on this every single show. And I'm bringing this back up because it actually plays a very important role in what I'm going to show you today.
Radical Islamists, communists, and socialists will work together against Israel, will work together against capitalism, will work together to overthrow and overturn stability.
The document that I'm going to show you tonight explains everything that's going on right now, from Antifa to Planned Parenthood, Occupy Wall Street, the gender issue, militant feminism, Me Too, the Green New Deal, literally everything that we're seeing. I am not saying that they are using this, but it is the blueprint to fundamentally and legally transform a country to socialism, authoritarianism. And it was written way back in the early 1950s by the architects of a peaceful revolution. From a free market to a dictatorship in 3 years without a single shot being fired. It's pretty incredible. And this plays a role. And let me go over this. Anarchist, Islamist, communist, and socialism work together against Israel. Are they doing that? Yes. Work together against capitalism. Yes. Work together to overthrow stability. Well, the big thing was people said that Islamists and communists and socialists would never work together. Well, they are. And we're seeing even Chris Cuomo last night on CNN said, you know, there's some really good things about Antifa. Really? They said that Islamists and socialists would never work together. But as you see, we're seeing that right now. They're working together. The only thing that I couldn't find was communists. But the theory was that the Middle East, it started over in Tunisia, if you remember right. So over in Tunisia, a guy set himself on fire, and then it spread over to Egypt and then Libya, and the whole region was up in arms, and it was the Arab Spring. But because of that, what happened? It destabilized the entire region. We got the caliphate in Syria with ISIS and Iraq. And then because of all of this unrest, there was a huge immigrant problem. People had to go someplace. And so all of the same experts today that are telling us everything's fine on our border said, Europe, you have to take all of these people. There was no checks, there were no balances. They just went up to Europe. And what has happened? It has spread, it became contagious, it swept the Middle East, and then it destabilized Europe, and now the rest of the world. How? Because what's happening on our border. I actually thought, I can't find a communist that is actually working together. I mean, the Women's March, they excused him. They're excusing her. They excuse them. The socialists, I forgot the communist. This is Emma Lozano. She's from Chicago. She is one of the main brains behind all of the groups coming to the border. She is a communist from Chicago, as we outlined on one of our shows. This has been complete, and it was this summer that I realized this board is now finished. So now what happens? Well, in our research, we found this document, and it is incredible. But before we get into it, I want to talk to you about something. Everything that I say tonight, I'm going to say some things that just aren't said anymore, but they are too important to worry about feelings. So if you have feelings that are hurt, I'm sorry, I really am. But as Ben Shapiro says, facts don't really care about your feelings. But if any time you feel angered by something that I've said, you might have already been triggered, please just write it down, continue to watch, come back to it. Ask yourself, why am I so upset? Is there any truth to what he said? Don't allow yourself to fall back into slogans or name calling. Prove your point, and not to me, but to yourself. Don't dismiss this show or allow somebody to dismiss this show that hasn't thought it through. I'm going to lay out all the facts, because it's going to be you that will need to stand for one side or the other. It will come down to you. So here's really offensive fact number one. Socialism, not a free market economy with a giant welfare state like Canada or Sweden, but an actual socialist state, could easily be charged and convicted of being a serial killer or a mass murderer. Let me show you how. This is according to the FBI. If someone kills 2 or more people with a period of time between each murder, we call them a serial killer. If a person kills 4 or more people in one murder, we call them a mass murderer. So using the most conservative numbers, socialism is responsible for 100 million deaths. Socialism has killed more people in the 20th century than anything else other than disease. Now, how in the world has a system so barbaric and murderous been given such a benign name? Socialism? Would any other system or ideology be given such leeway? At the same time, what's being denigrated is capitalism, and capitalism is responsible for saving over 1 billion people from extreme poverty in the last 15 years alone, while socialism has killed over 100 million. Let me show you something you never see here. Firing squads on civilians. They don't exist in America, but they sure did in the Soviet Union. They sure do in North Korea. They did in Cuba. They did in China. In fact, they're building concentration camps now for Muslims in China. And it was in China that tanks were sent in to stare down an unarmed Chinese civilian. Do you remember this? This guy, we don't even know who he is. He was brave. That is socialism. A state that doesn't care about the individual. And just yesterday, echoing the same memories of Tiananmen Square, Venezuelan armored vehicles actually and purposefully ran down civilians in the street. This is not the behavior of any kind of civilized society that values life. This is the society that says the individual has no worth. This is akin to ISIS more than anything else. In fact, ISIS did exactly the same thing during Bastille Day in France. Do you remember this in Nice? Where they just took a truck and run people over. These are the atrocities that happen when the collective is valued over the individual. But they don't happen here in America. Yeah, we've got our problems, bad problems. But you've never seen a picture of the United States government troops digging a ditch and just shooting people into the ditch. Why? Because we value the right and the lives of the individual. These are the reasons why, in this country, socialists have to deny their political affiliation at all costs, until recently. And they are beginning to fully take off their masks and reveal themselves out in public. I think it was 2008 or 2009, I told you this would happen. When I was at Fox, I warned you that this would happen. Remember?
The radicals reveal themselves. They'll become unafraid. I told you this, and I believe I set this up with something along the lines of, look out, because we'll be in trouble when the mask starts to come off. I told you about a year ago that as it would come unraveled, the radicals would start revealing themselves. Watch. I think these people are close. I think they're dying to tell us what the real agenda is. I think they're close to taking the mask off.
I love this.
Okay,
me
got it?
watching me. But that was just for personal fun. I want to show you the end stages of freedom. Socialism, communism, and fascism. The reason socialists have been so successful from hiding their murderous past is they've been very busy masking their relationship with the rest of the radical left. If you just tack on democratic in front of your name, socialist, boom, less scary. However, I want you to think like this. Just because you vote for slavery through the democratic process does not make slavery freedom. Even democratically decreed slavery is still slavery. But there's something else that people like Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez just don't want you to know, and it's this. Socialism, communism, and fascism, they're all cut from the same cloth. All three isms have three things in common, and they're important. One, capitalism, the free market system, is the enemy. Two, the needs of the collective outweigh the needs of the individual. And three, the end result is the same every single time. It is tyranny and a bloodbath. Don't believe me? Every home should have the Black Book of Communism. I'll tell you every single time socialism has been tried and what the death count was. But socialists always tend to cover up this little inconvenient truth. And you can't blame them. I mean, how far would you go if you're promoting a system of government that both Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, what the hell, throw Mussolini and Pol Pot in this, where those guys would all go, yeah, that's better than what you got in America. I don't think you're going to get a lot of, people signing your petition. But let me share something from an actual democratic socialist. This is somebody who is honest. This is from Jacobin magazine. This is the nation's leading socialist magazine. So this is not some hack magazine. This is a serious socialist magazine. And this was a response by one of their writers on what democratic socialists actually want. I'm going to quote, "Here's the truth. In the long run, democratic socialists want to end capitalism." Now, the author is a self-identified democratic socialist, and they go on to explain why they are intent on pushing for Medicare for all. Quote, "Many observers see groups like DSA pushing for policies like Medicare for all and decide we must actually just be New Deal liberals who are simply confused about the true meaning of socialism. That's not true." Still quoting, "Our goal is not to rein in the excesses of capitalism for a few decades at a time. We want to end our society's subservience to the market. Medicare for all is an instructive example." She then goes on to talk about how Medicare for all isn't real socialism. As I told you, socialism cannot be confused with a giant welfare state. The real goal in the future, according to the Democratic Socialists, would be to get something like the British NHS. You know, if you want this, why don't you just say it? Why the cloak and dagger? I'll tell you why. Because Americans won't go for it. You have to lie to them. Now, this is exactly what I said. The true goal of Obamacare was from the beginning. I played something and everybody denied it. No one would talk about it. But this is videotape of one of the architects of Obamacare, Jacob Hacker. He's speaking at the Tides Foundation on what the entire purpose of Obamacare really is.
Someone once said to me, this is a Trojan horse for a single payer. And I said, well, it's not a Trojan horse, right? It's just right there. I'm telling you, we're going to get there. Over time, slowly, but we'll move away from reliance on employment-based health insurance, as we should, but we'll do it in a way that we're not going to frighten people into thinking they're going to lose their private insurance. We're going to give them a choice of public and private insurance when they're in the pool, and we're going to let them keep their private employment-based insurance if their employer continues to provide it.
So the same people who told us that we were racist for saying that they were not going for single-payer health care, even if we had them on video saying this, they're now pushing for single-payer health care, Medicare for all, and they're saying that we're somehow or another bigots, racist. I don't even know what we are now, that we say, we don't want that. That will end capitalism. And yet, we have them in their own magazines and in their own words talking about ending capitalism. So let's say they eventually succeed. What's next? What is the ultimate end game? Single-payer health care? No, let's go back to the words of the Democratic Socialist. Quote, social democratic reforms like Medicare for all are, in the eyes of DSA, part of the long, uneven process of building that support and eventually overthrowing capitalism. No matter how hard you try to spin it, all three systems, communism, socialism, and fascism, they are all rooted in the same leftist Marxist ideology. They all view capitalism as the enemy. They all favor the collective over the individual, and they all end in tyranny. You know, it's amazing because there are two great lies that are in the modern era. And the first one is, oh, the devil doesn't exist. Really? And the second one is that fascism has anything at all to do with the political right here in America. Socialism, communism, and fascism, they are all kissing cousins. So, if socialism is the common denominator every single time, and it has this for a track record, over 100 million dead, how in the world do you get people to do it? Well, the answer of why it's being done is always about one thing: control. Some person or some group always wants to come forward in the midst of two different kinds of scenarios: times of great suffering or times of great prosperity. Lenin, Hitler, Mussolini, Mao, all of them came during times of great suffering. But that suffering would ultimately pale in comparison to the suffering that they'd endure under socialism. If you are somebody who you don't know who the hell I even am, you're somebody who is saying, I'm going to vote for the Democratic Socialists, and you're young. I know, Lenin, Hitler, Mao, they're all distant memories. They're ghosts from some high school textbook that you probably didn't read. Boring. But the most modern example is currently being played out right now. And the horror is right in our face. But even still, the leftists will refuse to blame socialism. Now, unlike Russia, Germany, and China, Venezuelan socialism actually began in a time of historic prosperity. How does a nation, a modern nation, go crazy? Well, I will give you Exhibit A.
Venezuela of 1950, there wasn't any other country in South America at the time that had more prosperity and more promise and hope. It was really from the discovery of oil during World War I that revealed that Venezuela was sitting on top of the largest oil reserve in the world, over 300 billion barrels. To give you a little context on just how massive that is, Saudi Arabia has 266 billion in oil reserves. The United States, we only have 33 billion. So to call Venezuela an oil juggernaut, at the time the world's largest exporter, is a massive understatement. So in 1950, the Venezuelan people were the fourth richest in the world, with a per capita GDP of just 3 spots lower than the United States. Capitalism was working for Venezuela, and the people were reaping the benefits.
Caracas, the swinging city of Venezuela. Good climate, fine buildings, wide highways with plenty on them. All in all, a pretty nice place to be for many reasons. Caracas is a good place in which to be young. With senoritas of this caliber in abundance, the young men of the city couldn't agree more.
But things really began to change around 1970. It was the oil boom, and this is 2 decades before Hugo Chavez comes in, and the leftists begin to infiltrate the government. The Democratic Action Party, notice the word democratic in this. Well, they are preaching all the same things socialists usually do. They used populist tactics, and they nationalized the oil and steel industries. This is a system that had been working and was responsible for the Venezuelan economic miracle, but it was now being turned in a new direction. Well, this causes the economy to begin to crumble, and riots are rocking the streets, and the workers go on strike. This is the time that a young military colonel began to emerge as the speaker for the oppressed. His name was Hugo Chavez. Chavez was elected president in 1998 with promises of a socialist utopia. He was going to bring forth a Bolivarian revolution. He won public support by demonizing the rich, see if any of this sounds familiar, large corporations, and landowners. So in 2001, he created the Enabling Act, and this is what gave him the power to begin seizing property and wealth. Large estates were just gobbled up and then given to the people. Capitalists in both the government and the industry were exposed and ostracized as Chavez consolidated his power. He even nationalized all the telecommunications industry and stifled all negative media reporting. Don't think that this couldn't happen here. Now, as business owners protested, they were silenced. They were alienated by Chavez's growing populist fan base, and he poured millions to fund social programs that kept everybody quiet and happy, at least until he ran out of other people's money. When Chavez died in 2013, Venezuela already ranked number 1 on the World Misery Index. Just 2 years later, inflation had risen over 100%. 90% of the population was now living in poverty. Now, 2019 looks a lot different than 1950, or even when Chavez took over. The Venezuelan inflation rate is projected to hit now 10 million%, worse than Zimbabwe. The average monthly income now is only enough to buy 12 eggs and 2 pounds of cheese. Nobody's eating a normal meal. They're chasing down cows in open fields. They're desperate for food, eating out of garbage cans. They've already killed and eaten all of the animals in the zoo, and the average Venezuelan has now lost 24 pounds in the last year. Over 3 million people have fled Venezuela in the past 3 years. Socialists successfully infiltrated one of the most prosperous nations in the entire world and turned it bottom up, top down, inside out. It's a post-apocalyptic wasteland. They turned their own people against one another. There is undoubtedly a crisis in Venezuela, and that crisis is named socialism, a warning from the dead.
Before we get back to Glenn, a quick update on Venezuela as the situation changes by the minute. May Day is, of course, a public holiday in Venezuela, but this year the holiday was marked by escalating protests. As the fight for the presidency of Venezuela rages on for the second day, it still remains unclear exactly who will come out ahead. This morning, opposition leader Juan Guaido, who has been recognized as interim president of Venezuela by the United States, England, and over 50 other countries, including most of Latin America, encouraged Venezuelans to show their support, tweeting another call to action. Today we continue with more strength than ever in Venezuela. Guaido and his supporters contend that he is the legitimate president and commander of the armed forces, and that Maduro's re-election was marred with massive irregularities, fraud, and coercion. Thousands of Venezuelans have taken to the streets demanding Maduro step down, but so far he has refused. Just yesterday, video showed an armored military vehicle accelerating over a median barrier and mowing down protesters. Earlier today, National Guard troops launched tear gas at stone-throwing protesters blocking a nearby highway. Maduro described protesters as guilty of serious crimes and warned that they would not go unpunished. Maduro, who is backed by Cuba, China, and Russia, also accused the United States of instigating the coup. According to Mike Pompeo, Maduro was ready to flee the country Tuesday morning. He even had an airplane waiting for him on the tarmac, but at the urging of the Russian government, he remained. Pro-Maduro protesters have also taken to the streets to show their support, but Guaido insists that he and his supporters will not back down until they achieve their objective. Before we get back to Glenn, I want to bring in Stu to talk about what we have going on tonight.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm really glad I was walking by just then. We have a pretty amazing show here, and I think you've seen the quality of it and how much has gone into it. And it is really important that if you can support by subscribing. If you want content like this, we really do need your support. If you can go to blazetv.com/Glenn. We have a special promo code for you tonight. It's double the savings that you would normally get, $20 off. Go to blazetv.com/Glenn and use the promo code GB20OFF, GB20 off. We're going to be going through a question and answer thing later on where you're going to get your questions. If you're on Twitter, you can tweet with the hashtag GlennTVLive. Glenn's going to be answering questions. Your Q's, his A's. It's going to be pretty exciting coming up. And as well, we have a great panel coming up to discuss everything that you're going to see. If you can't subscribe, and if it's just not financially feasible for you right now, totally cool. We would really appreciate you sharing this content. Glenn went out of his way to make this free because he wants to make sure this is seen. But as you can see, a lot goes into this, so we really want the eyeballs to get on it. People need to know this information. And if you can share it, if you can like on Facebook, it would really make a big difference to us. Anything you can do. Subscribe on YouTube. It really does get the word out there, and it helps all the fancy Mark Zuckerberg algorithms so that people actually get to see this stuff. So if you get a chance, either subscribe or pass the word along. It would certainly mean a lot to us because this message is really important. Now, let's go back to Glenn.
You can't take over a country like the United States, or Venezuela for that matter, without a plan. It takes years of carefully laid plans. And there are certain elements that you have to have in place before you can gain control. Some have described this as a giant pincer strategy, where pressure is applied from two different angles. But if you look back at Venezuela for a second, leftists had infiltrated the government as far back as the 1970s, and they began setting the stage for socialism by first nationalizing the industries and with advocating for greater social programs. Socialists manning public office were pushing down. And by the time the economy began to get worse, the seeds they had planted were enough to get people in the streets to direct their anger at anyone who opposed them. This culminated in a mass labor strike and riots. Hugo Chavez was the byproduct of this pressure. It's something that I began noticing happening right here during the Obama administration. What some leftists call the pincer strategy, I called something else back at Fox. It is top down, bottom up, and inside out. That's what this is. Top down, bottom up, inside out. The financial crisis of 2008 was the ultimate linchpin that they were waiting for. Because you need a crisis. Most times, you need a crisis. If you've laid the seeds, once you have a crisis, you can do it. 2008 to us was the economic downturn that led Chavez back to Venezuela in the 1990s. It was exactly the same thing. And people say, who the hell do I blame for this? They came crying from the streets. It's those evil 1%ers. The entire system is corrupt. That's how he got in, and that is what we've laid the groundwork for here. Do you really think that our economy is going to be as stable as it is forever? While the Obama administration filled up with radicals at the top, middlemen and organizations began funding radicals at both the top level and the bottom. We talked about people like George Soros and organizations like SEIU and Acorn. They help them push policy and rally foot soldiers in the street. And do you remember how President Obama reacted to Occupy Wall Street? Watch.
I think it expresses the frustrations that the American people feel, that we had the biggest financial crisis since the Great Depression, huge collateral damage all throughout the country, all across Main Street. And yet, you're still seeing some of the same folks who acted irresponsibly trying to fight efforts to crack down on abusive practices that got us into this problem in the first place. So yes, I think people are frustrated, and the protesters are giving voice to a more broad-based frustration about how our financial system works.
He's just legitimized a Marxist movement to overthrow the free market system. That's what it was. He basically said Occupy Wall Street is just expressing the overall will of the people. Why didn't you just throw your clenched fist in the air and say, workers of the world unite, drop the mic and storm off the stage? Because Occupy Wall Street was not reflective of the people. It was just one of the movements, the AstroTurf, that began to rise up. Do you remember when President Obama actually praised Black Lives Matter for, quote, raising policing issues? Now, notice he didn't provide any facts or numbers. He just went along with the narrative, and the media helped him. They took the bait, they ran with it. Now, is it really that hard for the President of the United States to ask the DOJ what's going on and then relay that information to the American public? I mean, it's not like the Attorney General is his direct employee or anything. So left without any kind of real government leadership, as usual, we're forced to do our own homework. And we either accept the ridiculousness of these narratives that all police are racist, or we look into it for ourselves and begin to feel alone. But let me show you some of the policing issues that President Obama helped legitimize. For instance, are cops shooting unarmed African Americans at will in record numbers? Well, last year, 47 unarmed people were shot by police. That's bad. 18 were black, 6 were Hispanic, and 23 were white. So not only are these instances rare, but they're not even weighted towards the black community. Other races are getting shot more often than African Americans. But what about the overall contact with police? Are police harassing the black community at a higher rate than whites? Again, the numbers just do not show this. The Bureau of Justice Statistics released this study in 2015, analyzing police contacts from 2002 to 2011. And what they found, on average, whites have more contacts with police than either blacks or Hispanics. This is top-down, bottom-up in action. It is the radicals at the very top enabling and supporting radicals at the bottom, and their goal is to turn the entire system inside out. Some might call that a revolution, but revolutions are always thought of as using guns. No matter how many times it's tried, the results are predictably and tragically exactly the same.
My name is Joanna Rodriguez. I was born in Caracas, Venezuela, and grew up in Houston, Texas. I came to the United States around 2001. My family still lives in Venezuela and is affected daily by what is happening with the Maduro and Chavez regime. The minimum wage in Venezuela is $3 a month, and my family, even those with higher salaries, only ended up getting $20 a month. But goods are still priced at dollars. So a carton of eggs will cost you $3, and you just spent your entire month's salary on a carton of eggs. They are part of a giant chain of on WhatsApp, a group message where they can barter and trade different necessities that they need. So one of the main ones is a different type of medication. Hey, you know, I'm running low on this diabetes medicine. Would you trade me for a loaf of bread? Or I need flour. Would you be willing to trade me for sugar? A lot of them daily decide on whether they want to go to work or whether they want to wait in line for whatever food is available at that market on that day. The majority of my family still there is a lot older in Venezuela, so they remember it more vividly than I do. They tell me stories of how beautiful it was, what a great life they had, where even a lower middle class person had a normal life, normal job, and on the weekends they could go to the beach, they could take vacations, they could go to the movies and dinner with their family, and that doesn't exist anymore. Chavez came in, was very charismatic, and was very well liked by the poor, and he provided them with hope that they were going to be represented. And slowly things started to change in Venezuela for the worse and to where they are today. Sometimes if they find out that you are opposed to the regime, you are planted drugs. So whenever you have a normal stop or interaction with a police officer or National Guard member, they search you, they ask to see your car or your purse, and of course, because you're innocent, you feel like you have nothing on you, you let them see whatever it is they need to see, and they plant drugs on you, and they take you to prison, take you to jail, and abuse them severely. Women, unfortunately, are sexually assaulted. It is not a situation that is pleasant whatsoever. My family is very optimistic of what is to come in Venezuela. I think that's something that's inherently within a lot of Venezuelans. We have so much hope for our beautiful country that was one of the richest in the world at one point. It has so many luxuries and beautiful landscapes, and they remain hopeful in Venezuela. On the day-to-day, they have to keep hope because at the end of the day, that's all that they have. And if they give up, what is at stake? It's their liberty. It's generations to come being oppressed by a dictator. I try to stay optimistic for them in hopes that we can see Venezuela be free in my lifetime and for generations to come.
This document was never supposed to be seen by Western eyes. We're not really even sure when it was written, but we think it was sometime between 1950 and 1955. It was originally intended just for internal Communist Party eyes only. It was a strategy paper, and it was written by the official historian of the Czechoslovak Communist Party. His name was Jan Kozak. We've actually found this document by complete accident as we began to pick through other things that we were working on for socialism. We are working on a book that will come out next year. When we started reading this, our jaws hit the floor. It quickly became obvious why this document has been suppressed over the years. It is literally the playbook. It's a blueprint, if you will, for how socialists infiltrate and take over a government. And it is all legal and all within the bounds of a nation's constitution. Its contents were first heard spoken out loud when the communist delegates referenced it at the International Parliamentary Union in London in 1957. But it was somehow acquired by Western assets 4 years later. And in 1962, it was presented and then later published by the House Committee on Un-American Activities in the 87th Congress. The current title that you can find it online came from the last line of the foreword of the American reprint written by author John Howland Snow, and I want to quote it. Representative government can be made authoritarian legally, piece by piece. The form remains an empty shell, and not a shot is fired. This truly is the revolutionary Bible. It may not be known or even used by people today, but they are as if they are following its directions word by word, and they flip countries. Were the early leftists in Venezuela who were blazing a trail for Hugo Chavez following this? Are radicals within our own government doing the same? I don't know. But by the end of tonight's show, you will not be able to tell the difference between what you're seeing leftists do in our own country from what socialists successfully pulled off in Czechoslovakia in the late 1940s. And the history has remained repressed and a guarded secret, really, until tonight. We so don't know our own history. Most people think that the former Warsaw Pact, and that is when Churchill and FDR and Stalin got together after the war and said, okay, here's how we're going to carve things up. We think that after this Warsaw Pact, the Soviets forcefully took places like Czechoslovakia, but that's not the case. The Yalta Agreement specifically forbade Stalin from doing that. The communists had to, some way, find a way to turn capitalist democracies to socialism without a gun, without a shot, without a revolution. So Russia's sitting there thinking, how are we going to do this? It all had to be done legally. And Czechoslovakia was the first test subject. Now, we all know what the history books say. The country, like most of the others under Stalin's boot, eventually flipped. But how it happened is never discussed. This is how it happened. The outcome was devastating, and the economic ramifications are still being dealt with to this day. Czechoslovakia began to crumble, as did the rest of those suffering under socialism. But before the communists instituted their plan, things in Czechoslovakia were much, much different.
The year? 1918. Prague. There was a new nation that was born. It was called Czechoslovakia. In its first 20 years as a country, Czechoslovakia was a free market economy, and it was one of the most robust in the world. That, however, is before the National Socialists, or the Nazis, and the International Socialists, the Communists, rolled in. But at the end of World War I, the Allies carved Czechoslovakia out of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the new nation's first democratically elected president was Tomáš Masaryk. Masaryk is considered the founding father of Czechoslovakia, and he spent a lot of time in the United States, where he grew to admire the American model of democracy. Now, under Masaryk's leadership, Czechoslovakia started off on the right foot. I mean, it was really, really good for a while, but Masaryk always maintained that Czechoslovakia needed at least 50 years to establish a firm foundation of a free nation. But thanks to the Nazis, Czechoslovakia only got 20 years. But before we get to Hitler marching in the first decade after its founding in 1918, Czechoslovakia's gross domestic product increased by 52%. Its industrial production rose by 41%. Its armaments industry, largest in Europe. Its textile, glass, and shoe industries were the most advanced in the world. Czechoslovakia was a free and open market. It freely traded with all Western Europe. Agricultural production was healthier than it ever had been in the region. Food and consumer goods were plentiful. By 1928, had only 38,000 unemployed people. That was less than 1% of its population that was able to work. And before Czechoslovakia turned 20, its standard of living was one of the highest in Europe. It was the world's 10th most industrialized country. The young nation, it did have its share of challenges, especially in the fact that it was made up of, several distinct groups of people, including 2 million citizens of German descent that lived in a western region called the Sudetenland. Now here's where things really begin to break down. Even though it wasn't theirs to give, Britain and France gave the Sudetenland to Hitler, trying just to appease him at the Munich conference in 1938. Now, this was used by Hitler just as a green light to take over the rest of Czechoslovakia 6 months later. When World War II finally ended in 1945, Czechoslovakia was briefly free again. And the president was Edvard Beneš. He was the protege of the founding father, remember him, Thomas Masaryk. And he returned from exile and tried to resume Czechoslovakia's founding principles.
From the official residence, President Beneš issued a hopeful declaration of the political aims of reborn Czechoslovakia.
Reorganizujeme v duchu důsledné demokracie politické a hospodářské svůj stát, aby mohl hrát svou tradiční roli pevného středoevropského mírového činitele v novém společenství národů.
Things were really looking up quickly. Czechoslovakia rebuilt its bridges and railroads. Farmers got back on their feet with over $200 million worth of supplies from the U.S. And with that, they were able to produce a good harvest in 1946 and 1947, avoiding the famine that the rest of Europe was going through. They were pretty much the breadbasket of Europe. By the end of 1947, Czechoslovakia's industrial and agricultural production were almost back to pre-World War II levels. The nation could actually see light at the end of the tunnel. The problem was, in a not-too-distant land, someone saw blood in the water, and it was the Soviets. Using the document that we will explore in a moment, they laid the groundwork for a communist coup in February 1948 that ensured Czechoslovakia's capitalism was put into deep hibernation for the next 4 decades. The new communist regime converted the Czechoslovakian economy into a bleak socialist clone of the economic system of Russia. There were long lines at shops almost immediately for minimal goods. Private land ownership was strictly limited. The state took control of all agriculture, and as a result, 14 years after World War II ended, Czechoslovakia still hadn't reached its pre-war farm production level. By 1960, Czechoslovakia had the lowest industrial growth rate in all of Eastern Europe. All the media and the entire education system, they were immediately put under state control. Homes were bugged, searched by the secret police. 250,000 Czechs were imprisoned for political dissent because they didn't like this new socialist idea. Families that were blacklisted by the communist government for any reason couldn't get good jobs or pursue higher education. The state restricted organized religion and closed down all 216 monasteries in the country. In the early 1950s, while America was shamefully looking for communists and Joe McCarthy hearings, Stalin put out his own order. The Czech communists held show trials for military leaders, Catholics, Jews, Democratic politicians. Their story ended a little differently than Joe McCarthy's. In socialist Czechoslovakia, they had 180 executions. Almost overnight, freedom and prosperity became a distant memory in Czechoslovakia. So between 2 world wars, Czechoslovakia was one of the most thriving democracies in the world and an economic leader of Central Europe with a free market system. But the monstrous heads of socialism, Nazism, communism, ruined the hopes and dreams and the lives of an entire nation. But out of those ruins in Czechoslovakia, a document is found and possibly provides us with foreknowledge of what's happening here in America. A document that outlines the path to socialism. A warning from the dead.
What's disturbing about this document is that it took communists only 3 years, from 1945 to 1948, to completely turn Czechoslovakia from capitalism to socialism. And not a single shot was fired. Not a single violent part of a revolution. So how did they pull this off? Kozak, the guy who wrote this, very critical in the document for how socialists had attempted a project such as Czechoslovakia in the past. He noted that in other countries, socialists had successfully infiltrated high echelons within the government, but they failed to do one thing: provide any kind of pressure from the bottom. Leftists can get elected to public office all day, and they can infiltrate the bureaucracy, but without foot soldiers on the ground for them to quietly support and rile up, governments never change. That is the key here. Now think back to Venezuela. They elected a socialist-leaning president back in the 1960s. But nothing happened until there was a massive labor strike and riots in the streets, and that is what brought Hugo Chavez to power. You can elect socialists like Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez all day, but if they're not supporting a bottom-up movement at the same time to mobilize, harass, shame, and bully others into compliance, the system will hold strong. Now, consider that principle, and then listen to this from Maxine Waters in that context.
Already, you have members of your cabinet that are being booed out of restaurants, who have protesters taking up at their house, who's saying no peace, no sleep. No peace, no sleep. Let's make sure we show up wherever we have to show up. And if you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd.
Most people just pass this off as, oh, that's just crazy Maxine Waters. But what she was spouting was not crazy. She, whether she knows it or not, is following this revolutionary playbook to a T. And it's been done before, and it's exactly how they did it in Czechoslovakia. This document is the first time the top-down, bottom-up strategy has been described in detail by people that actually pulled it off and flipped a nation. They described the bottom-up's role in 3 key areas. It systematically supports the revolutionaries in organs of power, enhances their strength, and makes up for numerical weakness. In other words, they realize that they're going to be in the minority, but they need to appear much larger than they actually are. For example, Maxine Waters can make a claim on MSNBC that people all over the country are revolting against the GOP en masse. But if they can get, I don't know, let's say a YouTube video of people harassing Ted Cruz and his wife in a restaurant, if they can get that to go viral, or let's say Antifa, a squad camping out at Tucker Carlson's house, the appearance is that this is rampant public dissent against Republicans or against people who believe in the Constitution that's breaking out all over the country. It has a direct effect on limiting the influence and positions of waverers and enemies standing in the path of the future progress of the revolution, end quote. Simply put, you have to intimidate. You have to make it seem like they're everywhere. It's one thing to oppose Jeff Flake on a live shot from the rotunda. It's a whole new ballgame to do that, plus unleash the foot soldiers to chase Flake down the hallway and scream, "Look at me," while he boards an elevator. To quote the document again, it awakens the forces of the people. It breaks through the onerous circle of intimidation and spiritual terror of the old institutions like the church. So that brings me to the actual plan. How did they do this Czechoslovakian revolution and flip this country in 3 years? Well, culture was number one. It was their biggest threat and their first target of attack. Step one in the overall plan. The idea of attacking culture as the opening salvo was actually ripped from another communist named Antonio Gramsci. He stated that capitalist countries were much too rooted in the culture of capitalism to initiate a workers' revolution on their own. For a government to flip, you had to first attack the culture at the core. Think of this. They listed several key areas, and they were these: churches, unions, mass media, universities, corporations, and foundations. They promoted open sexuality in freedom in 1948. They charged religious leaders with public crimes and said they were manipulating the government behind the scenes. They painted the church as outdated, racist, and bigoted. A brick wall in the face of progress, to quote. Well, it wasn't long before people were quite literally losing their faith. They infiltrated the Department of Agriculture, at the time representing one of the largest businesses in the country, agriculture, and it was doing great. But they set up peasant commissions in local villages that constantly criticized the capitalist culture of profit and wealth. And they said that it was discriminating against the poor farmers and laborers. So culture began to turn completely upside down. Then, step 2 was to ensure that any kind of republic-style democracy would never be a possibility. Kozak, the author of this, said that direct democracy was the instrument of the social revolution. He credited direct democracy as giving, quote, a rise to far-reaching political, economic, social, and cultural changes in the country. They were building and whipping up a reactionary mob, and direct democracy would be the tool that would ultimately transform the country overnight. Step 3. What a surprise, gun control. Guns, it was a crucial step here. The report states that guns for the masses had to be outlawed. Only those who were, quote, responsible would be allowed to have a firearm. Well, guess who was responsible? The Ministry of the Interior within the government was nearly fully infiltrated by socialists at the time, and they built up their own police force. They, of course, were the responsible ones, those in government, those who were socialist, those who agreed, as were the newly formed Marxist militias that were beginning to appear in the rural areas. Everyone else had to surrender their guns. Step 4 was popularize revolutionary demands. They were really, really good at this. They created this plan called the Program of Building, which was framed as progress. It included the redistribution of wealth, land, and nationalization. Socialist politicians in the government would send their plans directly to the foot soldiers on the ground, and they would shame any capitalist, any politician, any civilian that would vote against it, and they would say they're voting against the will of the people. They would out them in the media. They would shame them. They would destroy them. They claimed that they had been bought by wealthy businessmen or farmers. Turning over control to the government was progress, and private ownership was deemed against the people's will. Now, one example of how they effectively manipulated the masses was by proposing the millionaire's levy, better known as a millionaire wealth tax. It didn't have anything at all to do with giving the money to the poor. It was all about manipulation and isolating capitalists. If anyone opposed it, they were instantly branded as being anti-people or anti-poor or oppressors. The document marveled at the success of how effective this manipulation really was. Let me quote, "How important for the isolation of the bourgeois leadership of the other parties of the National Front was the proposal of the millionaire's levy alone, tabled in the government by the communists in 1947, at first rejected by its majority." It was all just a con. It was a manipulative isolation tactic. And the last step was to activate the bottom up. They had to mobilize the ground game from the bottom and coordinate it with the government officials at the top. They created a laundry list of organizations. Some of them were large, some of them had national membership, some of them were small, existing mainly in small villages and towns. Some of them included the United Revolutionary Trade Union, the United Association of Czech Peasantry, the Association of Liberated Political Prisoners, and smaller peasantry commissions. With direct coordination from the socialists within the government, these small and large organizations held nationwide rallies and protests. They pressured businesses and politicians to toe the party line. Anyone that strayed, if you were in business and you wouldn't go along, you were publicly shamed or set upon by a large gathering. This was their 5-year plan. It took them 3 years to flip a country. The results came swift and brutally. And keep in mind, this is 1945. In 1945, it was a capitalist country that protected private ownership. It was so American. But by 1947, 75% of all industry had been nationalized. Land from large farm owners had been completely liquidated and given to other people. In 1948, communist control had become so great that they grabbed what little power was left. Many have called that final power grab an outright coup. What was a strong economy began to crumble almost overnight. Currency and wages declined. Banks began seizing savings and deposits. The police state had to grow stronger. They held mock trials. They crushed protests. The media was censored. Yes, they started digging ditches and shooting people. Czechoslovakia would endure this hell for 40 years. For those living in Eastern Europe during that time, the stories of living under these repressive socialist regimes are strikingly and horribly similar. So, there's a couple of things. This is just a quick thumbnail of this. But I have been overwhelmed at how far down the road we are. Has anyone noticed how fast all of this is happening? How did we go from a country that we couldn't even admit that we were socialist? You couldn't say that. That was racist to say, hey, I think Van Jones, a former communist, might be a radical. That was racist just a few years ago, to now people coming out and saying capitalism is over. Do you remember what I said about the first chalkboard and how that's going? I need you to see first how this is being implemented and then what's coming. But let me just take a quick break, go over to Stu, and we really want to take your questions on today's show. We have an amazing panel for you, and I so appreciate you watching. If this is useful at all, please, please, silencing of voices is coming, and we need to stand together. And honestly, I don't care if you subscribe to the Daily Wire with Ben Shapiro. He's a friend. He's got a great thing going on over there, and they're great people. Just support whoever your voice is, whoever you want to support the Blaze of the Daily Wire. I don't care. But please, please support us and join us at the Blaze TV. Stu.
Thanks, Glenn. Look, this isn't just a history lesson. It's what's going on right now. Right now, as we speak, there are people in Venezuela risking their lives to escape socialism while we're running to it. How does that happen? A big chunk of that is the media. They make socialism sound so wonderful. And you can understand why people think it's so great if they don't know the actual truth. The networks are not going to give you programming like this. You're not going to get investigations like this from the mainstream media. You know it's not happening. As Glenn mentioned, everyone from the Daily Wire to the Blaze, we need to have your support if you want to go into this sort of stuff. We can certainly run our mouths all day, and that's always fun to do, and you got to do that sometimes. But to really go in depth on something like this, that's not going to be a sexy, clickbaity headline. You really need to have the resources to do it, and this is all you. You guys have made this happen so far, and we want to do more of this stuff. So we really ask you to come on board, and if you can subscribe, I think you should. I mean, I think it's a great value anyway. You got great shows like Stephen Crowder and Mark Levin and Eric Bowling and Ali and everybody here, which is great. Chad Prather, Graham Allen, there's a million of them. So that's great right on its surface. But it's also, we're talking about a community, it's a movement. It's really a machine to push back against what the mainstream media is telling people, trying to get the truth out there, trying to push back and actually show people what is actually going on, not only with history, but present and also the future. If you can subscribe, we'd love you to. Go to blazetv.com/Glenn, blazetv.com/Glenn. Use the promo code GB20OFF, GB20 off. That'll get you $20 off the subscription. We'd love for you to join. If you can't join, if that's not the right thing for you right now, that's totally cool. We understand. If you could subscribe to the YouTube page, of course, that's free. We're going to be posting stuff there. Share this video, like it, help spread the word, because if people can find out about this and find out about the truth, it's really going to be something that, really the only way that we can change this and stop it from happening. We're also going to be doing a question and answer thing coming up with Glenn in just a few minutes. You're going to be a part of that. If you tweet with the hashtag GlennTV Live, you can also post on Facebook or wherever you can reach us on social media. Use that hashtag GlennTV Live. That would be great. Please tell your friends, spread the word, and make sure that people know this information, because you're not going to get it anywhere else. Now, more with Glenn and socialism, a warning from the dead.
Well, my name's Alex Nason. I was born in the former Soviet Union, the state of Moldova. Spending my first 26 years over there kind of showed me what socialism, the real socialism is. People never had enough food. I had to wake up every morning at 6 in the morning, be in the line outside of the store in February to wait until the store will open so I would be able to get a bottle of milk for my wife and my son. So the first time I saw a small supermarket in the United States, I was thinking that this is a fairy tale. We spent about an hour just walking around and looking, and couldn't believe that everything is available here. And we were told that every third person in the former Soviet Union was a spy for the KGB or the secret police. It became a part of norm when we were talking. We would always look behind our shoulders. When I arrived to the States, it took me about 5 years to get rid of that habit of looking behind the shoulders. I was in the 7th grade, and on the way home, the first day, a couple of guys from my class realized that I'm Jewish, and they beat me up, just simply because I was Jewish. Came back home with some black eye, and I took the matters in my hands. I went to the freestyle wrestling. In 6 months, I became the city champion, and I kind of took care of the matter by myself. That was my first real experience with, for real, no reasons, being beaten up. When my wife went into the labor, I was not allowed to get into the hospital, but I brought her in about 2 o'clock in the morning. And I didn't know until 10 o'clock the next morning that I have a son. When they brought the kid for her to feed, she could show me, like, from the 3rd floor. I mean, I didn't see, of course, anything, but I saw that she has, and after bribing one of the nurses, I gave her, I believe, half of my monthly salary. She told me that I have a son and everything is okay. When we moved to the United States, it was like starting from the beginning. Everything was, whatever we left in Russia was at least 50 years behind. Our son was 3.5 years old, and he wanted a drink. I've never tried a Coke. I only have heard about Coke back in Russia. So we saw that machine, and we didn't know how to operate. So we were waiting until someone, a little kid, came in and put a quarter in and pushed that button, and we did the same. So it wasn't funny. I mean, I almost cried later the day because I had to start from the beginning. That's how behind the socialist system was in Russia. It was unreal. We were told that the capitalist system here in the United States is nothing what we had back in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is way ahead of everyone.
Welcome to the year 1947, because if you go by this playbook, that is exactly where we are currently at. I am really bad at timing, but I am overwhelmed to share with you that our time is running short, I believe. You have to decide where you stand. You have to think out of the box, and you have to look at things and take people at their words. You can't subscribe your thoughts and your feelings to other people, especially when they are telling you what they're going to do. If you look at what happened in 1945 to 1948, the parallels are it's uncanny. For instance, step one, here's our revolution today, culture. To attack the culture, just look what's happening to the church and our religious liberty. Faith organizations are under full frontal assault like never before. The sex abuse scandal within the Catholic Church, it might be their own fault, whatever, but it's now being used to demonize not only the Catholic faith, but all Christians as a whole. It's even caused Catholics to lose their faith and abandon their church. Catholic nuns were even forced to go against their religious doctrine and provide birth control due to Obamacare's birth control mandate. But this is America, and this is the church. No matter how much some crazy government official at the top may be attacking the church, we'd never in a million years have a bottom-up reaction like what went down in Czechoslovakia, right? I mean, it's not like people are storming Catholic churches and harassing people at worship. I mean, that would be nuts, wouldn't it?
The parishioners in the pews, many frozen in disbelief as protesters invade their mass to pass out literature and shout that they're worshiping in the wrong way.
Repent and turn to Jesus Christ. You must be born again. Pope is a Satan. Pope is a Satan. Mary's statue is a Satan.
If you think that's bad, think about how much worse it's going to be in just a few more years. The church is under attack globally, and the pressure from the top in many countries is intensifying. You remember this from a United States senator who's now running for president? Watch.
I do want to give you a chance to speak about your comments on gay and lesbians. You said in a speech that mourning an America that endorses perversion and calls it an alternative lifestyle, is your words. Is being gay a perversion?
Senator, when I was a politician, I had a very clear view on whether it was appropriate for two same-sex persons to marry. I stand by that.
So you do not believe it's appropriate for two gay people to marry?
Senator, I continue to hold that view. It's the same view.
And so people in the State Department, I met some in Africa that are married under your leadership, you do not believe that that should be allowed?
Senator, I believe it's the case. We have married gay couples at the CIA. You should know I treated them with the exact same set of rights.
Do you believe that gay sex is a perversion?
His credentials were not on trial here. His faith was, his Christianity, what he believed, his right to believe something different. Now, if he is going out and attacking people, that's different. But this is Salem 1692. Only the questioning wasn't, are you a witch? It is, are you a Christian? Do you believe that stuff, yes or no? Mass media and the universities. Do I even need to go over that? They're both leftist propaganda tools at this point, and the media bias goes directly to the heavy socialist infiltration on college campuses. It's happening. According to a National Association of Scholars study, out of 9,000 professors and 51 of the top-rated schools that they looked at, the number of Democrat to Republican communications faculty members is 108 to 0. The number of conservative communication professors is actually 0? No one? You think media bias is bad now. I fear we haven't seen anything yet. In big businesses, Czechoslovakia, they targeted Agriculture. Socialists today are targeting agriculture. They're targeting Silicon Valley. They're targeting big tech. There was a report that was, and I don't have it with me, that was smuggled out of Media Matters conference. It was conducted by Hillary Clinton's acolyte, David Brock. And it describes in detail how they are now collaborating with Facebook and Google, which is YouTube, and they have even secured raw data from them. Do you think anybody on the right is going to get raw data from Facebook, YouTube, or Google? I can't even get them to tell me exactly what people are doing that is offending them so much at Google and YouTube and Facebook. Last year, nearly every big tech firm in the country co-signed a letter opposing the Trump administration's audacity to say that biology is what defines a person's gender. For you to now say that there is a difference between a man and a woman, you're a heretic. And these are the people that are supposed to be all about science. It's no longer accurate to say we're losing the culture. It is lost. Step 2, direct democracy. Remember how important this was. It was an instrument of the socialist revolution. Our founders said direct democracy always ends in slavery and tyrants. After seeing this plan fully exposed, is it any surprise that all of this is being said from radicals right now in the government?
Ocasio-Cortez tweeting, quote, "It is well past time we eliminate the Electoral College, a shadow of slavery's power on America today that undermines our nation as a democratic republic."
Do you think the Electoral College should be abolished?
I said that in 2000. After what happened to the 2000 election with Al Gore.
Well, I'm in the process now writing an article that says there's a simple solution to it. We have to just abolish the Electoral College.
First of all, we should understand Hillary Clinton got more votes than Donald Trump. And maybe we might want to take a look at the whole Electoral College, in which case is seating a man for president who did not get the most votes.
Direct democracy is an end to freedom. It always is. Top down, bottom up. It will not work unless they abolish the Electoral College. If you want to know who's following this strategy, make a note of those calling for the abolishment of the Electoral College. This is one of the most crucial stages of their plan. It has to be done. Step 3, guns, that has to happen. It's another example that barely needs an explainer. The left is going all out on their assault on the Second Amendment. But their bottom-up tactics are becoming more obvious. Debbie Wasserman Schultz took the Parkland survivors, took them all in, and introduced them to the power players in Washington, D.C., and suddenly the March for Our Lives was born, and it was flush with cash. She was even one of the key speakers at the event, and we're supposed to believe that this was purely a grassroots movement with no top-down support. Let me ask you this. If these radicals really believe that Donald Trump is a dictator, why would you say you should give your guns to the government? It's insanity. Step 4, popularize revolutionary demands. The wealth tax. Have you heard that? This is where you truly go from capitalism to socialism. One of the ways the communists in Czechoslovakia were able to popularize redistribution was by shaming capitalists that opposed the millionaire's tax. Well, luckily, no one here would ever copy that in the land of the free, right?
You have this proposal out today. It's a wealth tax. It's very interesting.
Yep.
It's not income, right? So incomes are flows. You know, money coming into people a year, and that's usually how we tax things. Wealth is sitting there. It's a stock. It's a thing that's sitting there, and a wealth tax is a novel idea in the American context. It's on the very richest households with $50 million or more in assets. It's about 75,000 households. It would bring in a lot of money, $275 billion a year. So this is a lot. There's also
Stop. We don't need to see any more. The millionaire's levy has now become today's wealth tax. Do you remember the Czechoslovakian program of building? This was all really about gathering popular support to initiate the redistribution of wealth and land by nationalizing industry. Well, that name is so 1940s. We should change it today to the New Green Deal. This is what the Green New Deal is really all about. In fact, it says right here, this is the actual proposed legislation. It says The Select Committee shall have the authority to develop a detailed national industrial economic mobilization plan for the transition of the United States economy to promote an economic and environmental justice and equality. This is the end of capitalism. And by the way, if you truly care about the environment, if you're concerned about temperatures and sea level, what does it say that every time the people create this new Green Deal talk about it, they say that this is the priority? Watch.
What are some of the specific things you can point to that you think are practical?
We want a federal jobs guarantee. We want to expand labor rights. We need to expand indigenous people's rights. We need to give workers a consistent...
How is that going to save us from all burning to death or drowning or freezing to death? This has nothing to do with the environment. This is a change of the economy. It even states in the original Green New Deal, the document with what the entire thing is about. It talks about mitigating inequalities in income and wealth, including without limitation, ensuring that federal and other investment will be equitably distributed to historically impoverished, low-income, deindustrialized, or other marginalized communities in such a way that builds wealth and ownership at the community level. That doesn't sound very climate changey, does it? The bottom-up response? Well, it turns out the Green New Deal proposal doesn't even try to hide how they're going to incorporate that part of their strategy. It states, quote, they will deeply involve national and local labor unions to take a leadership role. Huh, that's in here too. I know I said the mask would start to come off, but this is ridiculous how fast it has happened. And once you see this plan and how you can flip a country in 3 years, is anyone waking up? People always start with a boogeyman. For the socialists in Germany, it was the Jews. For the socialists in Czechoslovakia, it was the Nazi collaborators. They held mock trials and confiscated their farms, their wealth, their businesses. Were they guilty? Who knows? Who cares? They had two choices: admit guilt or be shot. As I said earlier, 2 years later, this tactic had allowed them to nationalize 75% of the country's industries. Today, that boogeyman is climate, or anyone accused of Me Too, or the NRA, or anyone who's wearing a red baseball cap. They slap the Nazi, fascist, alt-right label on it. It's insane. They're insanely branded guilty in the court of public social media opinion. Anyone dares to explain themselves is publicly shamed, ostracized, and alienated. Again, exactly what this document says the Soviets were doing in Czechoslovakia. And the last step, mobilize the bottom up. Mass labor organizations, activist groups, and unions, they've all been in the back pockets of the left for ever. It went into overdrive during the Obama administration. SEIU, as I told you, spent $150 million back in 2008 to elect Barack Obama and secure a Democratic supermajority in Congress. During that same time, George Soros worked side by side with his SEIU, pouring in millions. And please don't talk to me about how I am anti-Semitic for bringing up George Soros. I don't care about his heritage or his religion. I care about his ideology. And just a couple of years after getting their pieces placed at the top, Soros, along with SEIU and the Tides Foundation, were funding Occupy Wall Street, the foot soldiers at the bottom. This is the Czechoslovakian communist strategy to the letter. And it is the same today with the bottom-up movements like the Women's March and the Tax March. What we're getting from the top regarding immigration now is so obvious. There's no crisis at the borders. Migrants aren't flooding our borders. There's nothing to see here.
That plan is a campaign to make America white again. It's a plan that says over 50% of the current legal immigration will be cut back.
Okay, stop.
That many people
you know
will
all
be
of this.
sent.
You know all of this. According to Custom and Border Patrol, There are over 58,000 apprehensions on the southwest border in January. That number has now skyrocketed to over 76,000 in February. The numbers in March have topped more than 100,000. Why do we have Brexit? Why is Europe in shambles today? One, they were irresponsible with their money. Two, their governments have been lying to people. Well, we got both of those things. The third thing was you had people coming up from the Middle East, all these migrants. They were forced to take them. All of these experts, the same people who are saying this to us, the same people were saying this is good for Europe. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't, and it's happening now. The numbers for just the first 2 months of this year are nearly doubling those of the past 5 years. So why lie about it? Because it's all about manipulation. It's all about alienating and ostracizing those that are against the people, as Kozak described from the party of the people. I exposed earlier this month that a bottom-up Marxist communist organization led by Emma Lozano, I talked about her a few minutes ago, was helping organize these caravans from a church in Chicago. They're involved with multiple communist issues, people and organizations, people like Angela Davis and organizations like the Communist Party USA. Cash is flowing into their coffers, provided in part by people like George Soros. Meanwhile, those wealthy donors are funding leftists in the government who turn around and press for open borders. Back in March, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez threatened the moderate Democrats. Remember, Cortez is not a problem for the Republicans. Cortez and all of these other new people that have come in, they challenged the Democrats. And many of the Democrats are terrified of them because of things like this. She said she would send the Democratic names to street activists if they didn't vote her way. This is practically pulled straight out of this document. Intimidate, publicly shame, and alienate. Top down, bottom up, inside out. So now we're left with, what do we do? What do we do? Well, first of all, we have to make sure that we can communicate with one another. We have to make sure that voices aren't stifled. I urge you to join a group of people. It does not have to be the Blaze. I would like for you to join us. If you found this valuable, we'd like to do more of this, but we need your support. Advertisers, we're being completely boycotted on YouTube and Facebook. They demonetize almost everything I do without even listening to it. Please join us. The next thing is you have to know what you do know and what you don't know. And be humble in what you know and fearless in your pursuit of what you do not know. For instance, can you defend the Constitution? I'm tired of being against stuff. Let's be for something. Who is standing up for the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? It's something that all of us should agree on. But you can't defend it if you don't know it. Most people cannot give the 5 rights in the First Amendment, let alone 10. Can you defend the free market and entrepreneurship over socialism? Can you? Well, let me go through a couple of numbers. See if you even heard of this. After a shooting, cable news will focus on guns, right? But these improvements are the equivalent of erasing all gun-related murders, just the things that we have done as a capitalist system to be able to help children live. Just the advances we've made in medicine. Improvements are the equivalent of erasing all gun-related murders for 630 years. Cable news will obsess over a plane crash for months. But the improvements we've made in medicine since 1990 are the equivalent of averting 27 plane crashes full of children every single day. The rate of children dying before the age of 5 has dropped by over half since 1990. Someone who went to school in the 1990s The rate of students killed per million in fatal shootings dropped by over 75%. Did you know that? Did you even know that? Among men in the U.S. since 1990, colon cancer has dropped by 30%. Lung cancer has dropped by 40%. Prostate cancer has dropped by 45%. Stomach cancer has dropped by 50%. In 1952, there were 879 cases of polio in the U.S. In 2017, there were 0. Why? Was it socialized medicine? The rate of forcible rape in our country dropped by over 30% since the 1990s. I thought we were living in a rape culture. It's down 30%. The homicide rate in the United States, the most dangerous place in the world, you know, dropped by half from the levels of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Half. Population that is homeless and unsheltered, 0.1% in the United States. 20% of the world. We don't have it bad. You know, once you really know who you are and what you know, what you believe, and when you're in control of your anger, and the sword that you always draw out first is reason and is heart, then perhaps, then you're ready to move on to the next stage. You're ready to start thinking the unthinkable, because that's what you have to do. The normalcy bias has got to stop. They can tell you all the time, we don't want to stop capitalism, but in their own writings, yes, they do. Read the Green New Deal. You have to think out of the box. It can happen here. You are not different. Neither am I. Truth is truth. Math is only true when 2 + 2 = 4. It equals 4 every time. No matter how you arrived at 3 or 5, it's 4. If you want to see what's coming, just start taking people at their word, no matter how unlikely it seems to you, that there's no way that you would end capitalism. If they're saying they want to, they will. Take people at their word when they say, you know what, I'd kill you. I don't know, you might say that a million times to a friend, and it doesn't mean that everybody is joking when they say that. When Islamists say they're going to kill you, take them at their word. And you know what? When you're proven wrong or you learn something new, admit it, and admit it loudly and first. Do you remember the book I talked about, The Coming Insurrection? It was a book that described in detail how France would spiral out of control. People thought I was crazy. Oh, France spiraling out of control. But this book wasn't written by some underground punk rock movement. This was from the French intellectual elite, and many of them went to jail for its publication. Why? Were they inciting, or were they just predicting? Quite honestly, I think it's a little of both. Because for revolutions to happen, there has to be an appetite for it. And the people of France, the socialists, the real socialists, were tired of the democratic socialist politician who would promise all the socialist utopia ideas, only then to disappoint election after election, never throwing off the free market, just giving them the crumbs of another big bloated government program. Revolutionaries only bide their time for so long until they begin to act. And they've begun to act all over the world, and they're beginning to act here in America. France is ahead of us by a couple of years, I guess. But it all begins with looking at political revolutionaries who are kicking up dirt because that politician or that politician isn't finishing the job. Van Jones is not radical enough for the left now. That should tell you something. AOC and Omar are now saying the same things about President Obama. He wasn't radical enough? When I first read The Coming Insurrection, I saw huge parallels to what was happening here, but no one would even talk about it back then. This cannot be the case this time. It's why I made this special for free. You must do your own homework and decide if this is true or not. And if you find it to be true, share it with all that are in your circle of influence. We're running out of time. So what could my possible motivation be? Well, I will tell you this. I grew up in an alcoholic family, and I'm what specialists would call the mascot of the family. I love that. The mascot of the family. The mascot is the one who tries to reduce the stress of the family by goofing around. They joke, they just do anything they can to distract the family from the problems. That's what I do. That's what I've always done in my family. I don't like tension. I don't like conflict. This has allowed me to survive some pretty stressful times. It gives me a very dark sense of humor about my dysfunctional family or my mother's suicide or whatever. But it has helped me as a default in stressful times. It has always allowed me to look elsewhere. I hate conflict. And if you've been listening to me for a while, you probably can tell this because I've tried to be a peacemaker. I really have. And usually it's to my own detriment. I can wish and hope, and I can just, please, please, please believe the best in people. But sometimes that horse is not a unicorn. And no matter how much I hope it to be true, pigs never have wings. This summer, after I realized that the warning I had given to you in 2011 at Fox about the caliphate and the destabilization that would eventually jump here and come to our own southern border was now at completion. And it was now time for me, I guess, to be able to see the rest. I was prompted to write down a series of events to watch for that would be road signs, mile markers, and exits that we can, should we choose to save ourselves, that we could take. It was unbelievably clear and extensive, and it came fast. I've already shared a lot of it, a summary of it, in a 3-part series that you can now find on BlazeTV.com. It boils down basically to 4 points. I don't know what happens first. I don't know how it all comes to fruition, but I do know that these 4 things will precede a global shift. And it will not end well for man's freedom unless we are prepared and know who we are. First, polarization and civil unrest is going to get worse. 2, economic destabilization on a global scale. It is going to be massive. 3, tech disruption. It is also going to be massive. And people will start pointing fingers and everybody, tech and the government will start to merge into one. And this will be a trust implosion. No one will believe anything or anybody. After that prompting, and quite honestly, after years of begging for the opportunity just to bring people together, to be a positive force, to allow me the opportunity just to be a rodeo clown again, it has come clear to me in the last couple of months that each of us have a role to play. I have one and you have one. I don't know what yours is, but we need to accept and complete our task. Mine is not to make the country laugh or, God forbid, distract or frankly be the one who leads us to some grand answer. My only role, I believe, is to warn you. Doesn't mean these things are going to happen, but if we don't change our ways, it will. My job is to tell you what you already know in your gut on both sides. And you know what? Yes, America has made terrible mistakes. All of us have. From the beginning, I'm now at the point where I believe our founders should not have compromised on slavery. I've always accepted that because they had to start the country, but I don't even know. They trusted God on everything else, and then they failed to trust Him on slavery. They compromised. And then we did it again. We failed after the Civil War. Lincoln was shot. We didn't heal the wounds. He told us, heal the wounds of the nation, but we didn't do it. In the 1960s, we were too tired and afraid to look straight in the eye what the problem was because JFK, Malcolm X, MLK, RFK, all shot, riots in the streets. The world was on fire, and all of us just wanted to go back to the normalcy bias. America at the time became the mascot of the family of man. We tuned in, laugh in, and tuned out our pain. Abraham Lincoln knew all of this. It was his message of the second inaugural address. It's the second shortest inaugural address in history, and yet probably one of the most memorable that I can't say this anymore, a lot of us could have quoted at some point in our life. It's only 701 words, But in that 701 words, Lincoln mentions God 14 times. He quotes the Bible 4 times. He invokes prayer 3 times. 10 years after he was shot, it was the Chief Justice Chase that gave the Bible that Lincoln put his hand on and took the oath. And when he took the oath, when he finished, he actually took that Bible and he kissed the pages. Well, we know now what the pages were that he kissed, and they were from Isaiah 5:27-28. That says, "None shall be weary nor stumble among them. None shall slumber nor sleep. Neither shall the girdle of their loins be loosed, nor the thet of their shoes be broken. Whose arrows are sharp and their bows best. Their horses' hooves shall be counted like flint, their wheels like a whirlwind." 41 days after he called for us to come together and heal the wounds of the nation, he was shot. But his words still kindle something in us. The spirit of Lincoln's words still stir our soul. And I think it's because at his moment of triumph, at his moment saying, yeah, we won, he chose humility. Woe unto the world because of offenses. For it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. If he shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills it to be removed, and that he gives both North and South this terrible war as woe due to those by whom came the offense, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continues until all the wealth piled up by the bondsmen 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by another drawn by the sword, as it was said 3,000 years ago, so it must be said today. The judges of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. America, we must heed Lincoln's message again. Offenses will come, and woe unto us by whom the offense has come. The most important message I can give you tonight is this. Those who wish to enslave others for their own power, their own gain, and their own glory are not enemies of mine or yours. They are enemies of his, because these rights ultimately belong to him, and they have been loaned to us for safekeeping for the next generation. It is our responsibility. We must stand up and protect those rights. We must live up to the words of our founding mission that, yes, all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have fallen short time and time again. It's a lofty goal, but worth it. But if all of us, with real humility, recognize our wrongs, we begin to show not anger or vengeance or hatred towards others, but rather empathy, and just show simple, small kindness. If we meekly ask for forgiveness, admit our faults, and turn our face back to him, he will make up for the shortfall and he will heal our land. We must embrace, we must stand firm for and further the cause of individual sovereignty, justice, individual justice, and individual dignity. Social justice of the 1850s has been perverted intentionally into collective justice of today, and it is a lie, it is evil, and it is bloodthirsty. The founding declaration words are worth dying for. But more importantly, they are worth living for. And live we must. Socialism, collectivism, authoritarianism, I don't care what you call it, it's a death cult. But it will not and cannot be beaten by fighting hate with hate or lies with more lies. We will not survive if our goal is just to change men's minds or to win. We must change men's hearts, including our own. There is no winning when half the country feels like they've just lost. But here's where we've gone wrong. We don't think we have anything in common, but we do. No one crosses an ocean in a rickety wooden sailboat for months. Nobody risks their lives in a homemade raft to cross the Gulf to get to Florida, or send their children to cross a dangerous river in the middle of the night with dangerous coyotes because of our GDP, or our low unemployment rate, or even, yes, blessed universal health care. People don't come here for that. They come here for the American idea. For most of the world who are currently praying for us, please, America, wake up. We still are the shining city on the hill. They can see it. Perhaps we've grown so accustomed to freedom's lamp that we no longer turn around to even notice the flame that lights the world's path. Yes, this is a place that sometimes sucks. This is a place where sometimes you get rich, sometimes you don't. This is a place where if you work hard, play by the rules, and build your own mousetrap, sometimes you can live the life you design. Perhaps you'll even become rich. But when we look at the entire population of the entire earth, even the poorest among us in America are the wealthiest 1%. But even this argument is missing the point. That is a uniquely spoiled, entitled, and American way of looking at things, because people do not escape oppression to come here to get rich. They come here to be free. And at this hour, at least at this hour, we still are. But the hour grows late. Have we become so arrogant that we are blind to our own true wealth? Are God-given freedoms protected by the Bill of Rights? I love the line from Thomas Paine, heaven knows how to put the proper price on something so celestial as freedom. And just as it was said before, if he decides that all of the American wealth be piled up in one giant heap and be sunk, then it still must be said the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. The foe we fight is not the name we hear every night on cable news. It's not the ones in the voting booths, not the one of the other parties, whoever it is that we hear. That's not who our foe is. Our foe is found in our own arrogance, in our own apathy, in our own self-imposed ignorance. Our enemy is us, our doubts, our fears, our anger, our own foolish, misplaced pride. We do not fight flesh and bone. We fight the same evil faced by the ancients that have gone before us. I ask you tonight to ponder these things, to do your own homework, to know who you are. And then let us begin again with malice toward none, with charity for all, with the firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. Can we strive on to finish the work that we're all in? Can we bind up the nation's wounds? Can we achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations?
Take me away, far away from here, where the night sky blazes and the stars appear. When I'm with you, everything's gone. Together we'll rise and disappear.
Glenn is going to be coming back on and answering your questions on social media. We encourage you to tweet using the hashtag GlennTVLive. He is going to be coming back in just a few minutes, and we're going to be discussing anything really you want to talk about from the special. First, I want to talk to a great panel we have here, including really distinguished, except for Justin, of course. We're talking with Martin Palush, who is the former Czech Republic ambassador to the United States, Dr. Carlos Ponce, who is a senior fellow and director of Latin American programs at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and of course, Justin, as well from the Heartland Institute. Let's start with today, Justin. Sure. We kind of saw some of the stuff that we're talking about when it comes to socialism is it has been sort of remade for a lot of people that didn't go through these eras in the past. These things are kind of new to them, people who are looking at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. If you're a millennial, you've never maybe dealt with these things in the past, and you don't really know what they are. When you talk to other millennials, what do you hear from them?
You hear that socialism is basically a form of charity. That seems to be the pervasive view among younger people, that socialism means equality. In fact, when they've conducted polls, that's the #1 answer that comes up. It's equality. Younger people didn't live through Mao. They didn't live to see the Berlin Wall fall. I don't remember those things happening even. So you have to reach younger people in a different way. And I think that the most important way to do that is to explain to them why socialism, even if it could theoretically work, it's highly immoral.
Is it surprising to you that a generation that is dealing with so much customization, so much seeing the benefits of the free market, everything from Uber to eBay to all of this is a real sign of what the free market can do when it's unleashed, and yet this generation is the one who's taking most advantage of that, but also most friendly to the ideas of socialism.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that the primary reason for that is because when they think of socialism, they think of a giant welfare state. So they don't think socialistic programs are for them. They get to use their Apple computers still. They still get to take advantage of capitalism. It's for poor people, the people who don't have those advantages. And so they see socialism as a way to help the poor. They see it as a form of charity.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, and it has real complications that wind up coming from it. Dr. Ponce, we are looking at Venezuela right now, and one of the most shocking things about this, to me, is the idea that we can look at Venezuela happening before our eyes. What the results of socialism gone wrong, and yet that is kind of, we look at that and we say, well, I guess we want to walk in that direction now. Are you surprised that Americans are not seeing the warnings from Venezuela?
I always hear the same thing. 20-something years ago, when Chavez was just a candidate, or when Chavez was planning the coup d'etat and failed with the coup d'etat, people were talking about, no, it's impossible for Venezuela to go that way. It's impossible for Venezuela. Even the ones where we were alerting about the possibilities of Chavez being a mess. I never imagined this disaster. Everybody say at that time Venezuela has some institutions, has political parties. Chavez is gonna probably rule the country as the rest of the corrupt president that we had in the past. Nothing's gonna happen. But after that, 20 years after that, we see the destruction of the country, the destruction of the economy, the destruction of the oil industry. A country that used to produce 4 million barrels per day now produces 500,000, 800,000 barrels per day. A country that had highways, one of the most modern country in the region, is now falling apart with 3.5 million Venezuela in the border with Colombia, with Peru, and it's becoming a total mess for the region with a humanitarian crisis. From a rich country to a poor country. And that was in a democratic way. There was no revolution. Chavez was elected because there was a crisis, an oil crisis that helped Chavez to win the presidency. And Chavez has been doing that. It's the same case of Nicaragua too. He won an election and destroyed the country, Daniel Ortega. You can see how they use democratic means to get into power, and then they stay in power.
Was there any way they could have stopped this? I mean, was this an overwhelming wave that with Chavez that changed the country? Or was this something that if people maybe were able to see this coming, that they could have done something to stop?
It was also suicidal from the political parties. The political parties saw this coming and they never did anything. People saw this crisis coming and nobody do anything because they want to take advantage of Chavez. They wanted to have something with Chavez and power with Chavez. Chavez was, it was something in the making. It was worse than what we expected, but it was something there. Fidel Castro planted the seed years before. Fidel Castro tried to take control of Venezuela in the 50s. He failed, and he begins to plan this with the Foro de Sao Paulo, the Sao Paulo Forum. For almost 30 years, he was planning to take control of Venezuela, and he made it.
Amazing. Martin, you, as someone who went through socialism, lived through socialism, you see Venezuela, you see what's going on there today. How do you see this happening? Is it something that can be cured by the people rising up? Is it something that has to happen fundamentally with each individual person?
Good question. Look, I was born in 1950, so communism or socialism is experience of first 40 years of my life, and the basic feeling of people under these circumstances is helplessness, powerlessness. So people have a rather tendency to coordinate themselves with that situation. For me, when I was 18 years old, was 1968, it was a maybe false hope that we could have got something better still, democratic socialism, but democratic socialism of 1968 would have been something much better for me as a teenager, being able to travel, being able to read, being able to participate in public discussions. And then we were sent back, the Soviet-led invasion, and there was another 20 years of the same situation. So what I'm saying is that international context is extremely important. In 1968, it was still Cold War, and I was not expert in negotiations with the Soviet Union and the United States, but this bipolar stability was a great factor. We were fortunate in 1989, and we could look now at the process that culminated in 1989, that when we had a chance to make a revolution, it happened, and we are where we are right now, not in the paradise, but we are a democratic country. So when I see Venezuela, when I see Cuba, I'm talking with Cubans all the time, for 30 years now almost, and I hoped that they would have followed us after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Periodo Especial was instead of that. So I am 100% sure that it is up to the people of Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, but enabling international environment is a key thing for their success. I am struggling to bring the United States and the European Union, we can criticize that entity very much, together, so that freedom is what matters and not welfare states.
I'm fascinated to get your perspective on, after you go through socialism and communism, and you come out the other side, I mean, the Czech Republic has been a real success story. I mean, you look at that as a real, every country's got its problems, of course, but there's been real positive coming out of such a negative. How does that even happen?
Look, I will tell you one more thing. The 20th century was a short one, started with the results of the First World War and ended with the fall of communism, a bipolar structure in Europe. What we are living now is a new era. Totalitarianism still is a great danger. It might be coming with different names, not Nazism, not communism as it was in the past. So I think that we need now to use our experience of the past to help people who are really seriously struggling for freedom today, be it in Venezuela, Cuba, and you can find many other countries. China is should be great concern of us. I think that the world should take lessons from the past and all these victims, millions of people who were killed, whose lives were destroyed by these type of regimes, should not be forgotten.
Dr. Ponce, I want to go back to Venezuela here for a second, because we're seeing this kind of happen right in front of our eyes, and I'm struck by the changes. I see it certainly among younger people here in America, but really all over. We talked to Marion from the Victims of Communism Memorial earlier today, and he said something that was fascinating to me. Glenn asked him where the organization came from, and he said it was from a unanimous act of Congress in 1993. I mean, I don't feel like it would be unanimous today in our Congress. I feel like certainly to recognize communism is incredibly important. The work you guys have done is amazing, but I feel like entered an era where people have forgotten the truth of the last century.
Well, there are some people here in the U.S. that are blaming the U.S. for the disaster in Venezuela. They forget about that the sanctions only went to individuals in Venezuela and not to the country and the economy. The sanctions against the economy is just this year. So the disaster in Venezuela has been going on for a couple of decades. So people have to realize that this type of regime also manipulate. They frame the discourse. They frame everything to protect themselves. And Chavez protected himself with the image, the ideology, selling the revolution everywhere. And even here in the state, a lot of politicians has been supporting in the past, and a lot of politicians has been supporting the regime right now. There are some people in the Venezuelan embassy protecting the Venezuelan embassy for the revolution of Venezuela against the Guaidó. So there are some people that really believe that false ideology, the socialists in Venezuela.
You want to jump in?
Just wanted to say, I don't think that all young people are so naive and uninformed that they would be easily subscribing to socialism. I just finished my class, graded 45 students, and I have a material proof. Most of them from Latin American countries, Latin American countries, and they are all very much aware of the criminality of regime of Hugo Chavez, Maduro, and all others. So I think that if we give a chance to a meaningful dialogue and communication, freedom will prevail, because people like to have freedom of expression. But their opinions need to be challenged, and if they are incompatible with common sense, so common sense should come in.
We have to eliminate a phrase everybody keep in their mind. This is not going to happen to me. This is not going to happen to us. I haven't experienced the same phrase in Ecuador, when Correa took control of Ecuador, when Daniel Ortega took control in Nicaragua. I cannot enter to Nicaragua. They expelled me from Nicaragua. They have been persecuted in Cuba. The same phrase all over. This is not going to happen. Venezuela is different. Nicaragua is different. Ecuador is different. We have to think about this and think that this could happen to us anywhere.
Justin, I want to get to one more thing here before we leave. Do you have the same hope that Martin has on the youth? I mean, do you see that? I mean, I definitely do. I'm encouraged a lot of times when I talk to people individually, and I don't know if this is just a function of our conversations becoming more distant and electronic. When I talk to young people individually, they seem to understand these things. I mean, they want to have the free market. They want to have freedom. They don't want a dictatorship. Nobody does. Yet when, I don't know if it's just because we loosen these, the bonds of human interaction and we wind up judging entire groups without really realizing what they're talking about.
I think that most younger people, I think the vast majority of all people don't want authoritarianism. The problem is that you create these systems and then you slide into authoritarianism and you don't even realize that you're doing it because it happens over a very long period of time, or you create a situation where the economy just completely collapses because, I don't know, you have $22 trillion of debt and no way to pay for any of it. And now all of a sudden you have a bunch of desperate people who will do literally anything that a very charismatic leader who happens to be president or running for president at that time promises in exchange for support. And so that's where you get into trouble. I think that we are on the verge of that happening because I don't think people understand history, and I don't think younger people, and I don't think that younger people understand the value of capitalism. Support for capitalism in polling has dropped by 23% in the last 8 years, percentage points. And that's because younger people are totally ignorant of these things. But I do think that that millennials and younger generations are hyper individualistic in many ways, that they do like free market products and services, and that they are very creative, and that there are a lot of really wonderful things about younger people. They just need to be informed about the dangers of socialism and communism and collectivism and why those things are wrong, even if they work, they're immoral, they're evil, because it creates a tyranny of the majority, and it almost always leads to authoritarianism. And so I think that's the important message that we have to drill into younger people's heads over and over and over again, because they've been, frankly, indoctrinated by the left-wing public school system for decades now.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for doing this and sharing your perspective. It was really helpful, and this is a really important message, and I'm glad you guys were able to help along. And this is important, and you have real historic perspective here. Thanks so much for doing this. Throw it over to Glenn now with some stuff, questions from you on social media.
Thank you so much, Stu. We're running obviously a lot longer than we thought we would. But I wanted to bring Jason and our social media team in who have been watching, and we want to thank you so much for watching tonight. Please like this, review this, rate this, and pass it on to a friend. That helps other people discover it. But we want to take a few questions from you before we sign off, and then I'll take a lot of questions tomorrow on radio as well. You can still tweet all night, and we'll go through them tomorrow. What was the general feeling that people had, do you think?
Well, we had a lot of really good reactions. I would say that probably the most common reaction was one of like, it was like a common, what do I do? Like, I'm just one person. What do I do? Like, we see it.
You both are shaking your head, same thing.
Yeah, we see it, we feel it, we know what you're saying is true, but like, what do we do as just individuals? So that was like the main, if I had to summarize.
So I think, we were talking about this today. The first thing we have to do is, gird our loins, if you will, to use Lincoln's phrase. We need to make sure that we can defend the free market and entrepreneurship and know the Constitution. I think we really need to keep history in our own notebooks because it's being changed in real time now, like I've never seen before. I worry that we are beyond where I thought we were, but it is not hopeless. One of the things, I know this, we lost almost every battle in the Civil War until Lincoln stopped making it about saving the Union. And he became just distraught. We were losing everything. I think we lost every battle halfway through. Maybe we won one. And Lincoln was driven to his knees, and he realized, we got to make this about slavery. This is about freeing people. And like I said in his second inaugural address, if God wants to take everything, that's fine. This is the right thing to do. And he called for a national day of fast, prayer, and humiliation, to ask forgiveness and then turn our face back to God. We did that, and to the day, we won every battle, I think, except one in the second half. We have to get our priorities straight. And right now we're making it about winning, we're making it about our stuff, we're making it about anything else but freedom. And we have to be able to defend it, we have to know what it is, we have to be positive. I can tell you all the bad things, and like you say, but I'm here to be a mile marker and tell you we're passing all the exits, and it's worse than you think it is. Here's historically how this works out. But I really think that we need to get to our religious leaders in the first place and pray and ask God, turn our face back to Him to heal our land. I think that's probably the most important thing we can do, because without divine providence, I don't think we're going to make it. I think we're too late.
I think we saw some people asking the question, is living out my faith on a day-to-day basis something that can make a difference in helping me get through to people on this issue and help them see the other side of it?
What is coming is going to not be like the Civil War. It will be house to house, neighbor against neighbor, family member against family member. There won't be a north and south line. And that's the way I think what's coming. And there is, I talked about a little bit about it, that there is a collapse of trust that is already beginning to happen. But I mean a collapse of trust. Nobody will believe anything about anybody. And when that really happens, you better have some credibility, because you have to be somebody who is seen as reasonable and kind and decent. Most Americans don't want this. Most Democrats are not looking to collapse capitalism. They just don't believe that that's what these people are talking about because it seems crazy to them. But that's what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's where self-education comes into play, because a lot of the questions that we got were asking about how the public education system has failed their kids. And I think that's one of the big issues today, too, is that not a lot of people are reading up on the history of what socialism really is or what led to it.
Yeah, stop sending your kids to college. Stop it. Stop it. What's wrong with you? You're paying for indoctrination. Stop it. I think your college education is going to be worthless someday, really soon. And why we would pay to have our kids turned against everything that we hold dear is beyond me. Especially when you can educate yourself in so many other different ways today.
Do you want to maybe take a question from someone who I don't think this is a BlazeTV subscriber. I don't think this is our demographic.
Okay.
But they ask a good question. So this comes from the Socialist Party of Great Britain, the official, the verified account. So they watched the special, obviously.
Okay, in Great Britain. Okay,
they've responded tonight. So the question is, how many times will you say Venezuela has socialism, thereby causing actual socialists to fall about laughing? So the question is, Venezuela is not real socialism. So go.
No, I understand, and since you're from Great Britain, let me answer it this way, because you understand. When I bite hard. I can't remember exactly what the slogan is for the Fabian Socialists, but since you are from Great Britain, you'll know about the Fabian Socialists. It is really fascinating to me how you can take the United Socialist Republic, USSR, and squeeze socialism out of that and make that into communism. Yes, it is communism, but you as a socialist know that there are two levels, really, of Marx's plan. There's socialism, which is the entry, the purging, and then there's the utopia of communism, which communism has never been done. Socialism has always been done, but communism is when everything is returned to the people, when you get the corruption out and the governments are great and there's flowers on every table and everybody's hair has flowers in it. That's communism, not the line them up and shoot them and put them in a gulag. And you know that. Socialism has been tried over and over and over again. And I'm sorry, but you all sold Venezuela socialism. We have all the tapes of all of the people in Hollywood going to say what a socialist utopia this was. Socialism is always denied once you run out of other people's money. Once you run out of other people's money, or once somebody doesn't want to leave power, and you have direct democracy and they rigged the election or whatever it takes, once it starts to collapse, then you say it's not true socialism. That's amazing. That's amazing. That's like saying, the rides are all down at Disneyland. Well, but it's technically not Disneyland today because the rides aren't working. Dude, if it's broken, it's still Disneyland. You have socialism. When it breaks, it's still socialism.
Actually, I think Ilhan Omar today said that it's actually because the United States bullied Venezuela into collapsing.
Well, that's usually what they do. And again, I just remind you of my prediction that the socialists, the Islamists, the anarchists, the radicals will all work together to first destroy Israel, capitalism, and the Western world.
This next question is from @LeadingLiberty on Twitter. She's actually an aspiring teacher. So the question is, how can I present the evils of socialism without getting myself outed from academia? Or should I just abandon that chase and chase my other passion in podcasting? So she's basically asking, should she give up the fight in academia?
I will tell you, there's nothing more noble than teaching children, and as long as you are teaching facts and not opinion, you should be protected, but no longer in America. And if you think podcasting is going to be safer, you're sadly mistaken. As I've said several times today, Steven Crowder is already on 3 strikes now with YouTube. He is afraid. I think he's going to be on the radio show tomorrow morning. He's afraid that he's going to lose his YouTube following, which is over 2 million people. you know, the Blaze is nice, but it's not a free YouTube place. And, you know, we are demonetized. Everything I do, it doesn't, I don't even think, do they even stop and look at what I'm doing before they?
I think it's your name. It's
Yeah.
just
Right, it could say anything, and they demonetize. The one thing you really, really need to do is support people, and I really don't care who it is, but if somebody has a broadcast entity or a voice and it appeals to you, please support them. I don't care how you support them, just support them. What else?
So this one's from at Ace Junior 77. The question is, this is a good question because a lot of people, when they think of flipping a country, they think of military overthrow, right? I think you have an interesting take on this. So what has been the role of the military in the flip to tyranny? Many feel that the U.S. military would never turn on we the people.
Yeah, I don't know, because especially with the world, you know, 10 years from now with deep fakes, are you going to know what's real and what's not? I don't think what we're talking about tonight is not a military coup. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a legal flip of the system. There's not a shot fired in Czechoslovakia. That is the goal. There was not a shot fired to get to Hugo Chavez. It's a flipping legally. You know, the one thing that we should all be concentrating on is never allowing direct democracy. And I would be saying this if I were a Democrat and, you know, my guy lost in 2000 and, you know, my woman lost the last election. I'd be saying it because direct democracy always leads to tyranny. Our founders were very clear on that. We saw it in tonight's special. This electoral college, this move to change this to direct democracy changes us fundamentally. There's a reason it was number 2 on the checklist of the former Soviets.
There's some people who are feeling like the generation of like the millennials is kind of lost. It's maybe too late for them, and looking ahead to how do you get this issue to younger people, to children? How do you break something like this down to lay a foundation for them to understand issues like this?
I will tell you one of my real goals in broadcast before I die or retire. I'd like to take on the Children's Television Workshop. I would like to take on Sesame Street because that thing is no longer what it was. And I'm not saying I want to indoctrinate kids. I just want to say the truth to kids. And we have lost the millennials. I think the millennials, it's over. But the generation that is now, you know, 8 to 20, they're more conservative than really my generation. Things change, and it changes especially when you become a rebel for speaking it.
There's always a counterculture, right?
Always, always. And I remember saying this in about 2001, when Jefferson becomes a revolutionary again, America will thrive. And we're approaching those times.
So that's a good segue to at RA Podcast. So you're saying, I mean, his question is, you know, he's 29, he's on that edge of a millennial, and so are you saying that the AOCs and the Bernie Sanders of the world have kind of won over that millennial generation, and there isn't really, you know, a path forward
they've
for?
won over the generation, and I think this is happening all over the world. They're winning over the generation, the younger generation, who do not think like I do, that there's a system and this is the political party. They don't see a reason for that anymore, and they shouldn't. It's broken. It's awful. It's terrible. Capitalism, remember, capitalism has, what, a 46% approval rating? However, the free market has about a 90% approval rating with the same millennials, okay? So they see capitalism, and that's crony capitalism. They see this awful system, and it's horrible. It's horrible. And then they see this idea of it doesn't have to be that way. But nobody is actually telling them the truth, like the socialists there. That they know what socialism means. When you ask millennials or anybody, are you for universal health care? Yeah, because it sounds like a great thing. Are you willing to pay taxes? Are you willing to wait in line for health care? Then all of a sudden it changes, and the numbers are cut in half. The best thing that we can do is just educate ourselves first, and then educate others. But what we're doing right now is we're fighting over Mueller. Who gives a flying crap? Who gives it?
The media does. That's what makes it so hard to control the conversation.
Who's watching the media? Really, who is watching? Who's watching Fox News and CNN? Fox News is blowing everybody else out of the water. But generally speaking, it's everyone over 60. They've made up their minds. Nobody 20, 30 years old. Are you watching CNN?
Well, for my job.
For your job. For your job. Nobody's watching television. Why do we care? Why do we care?
Good point. Austin on Facebook, he asks, is there any politician who's actively fighting and kind of leading the charge to kind of combat this movement?
Yeah, the best leader in Congress, I think, is Mike Lee. He knows the Constitution and he is fighting for the Constitution. There are others, Rand Paul. There's these really great, and gosh, I can't think of their names right now. The other small government libertarians.
Amash?
Yeah, Justin Amash is tremendous. Tremendous. There are some good guys, but for the most part, I think we're at the point to where the Soviets were. When did the wall come down? 1992, 91, 92, somewhere like that. I think we're like at 1990, where the politicians are like, this thing is coming apart. I'm going to start transitioning and put myself in a position over here to be part of the new system. I think we're actually there, and you see it through the corruption of people like Biden that's just getting rich off of this system. And once that stuff is exposed, but it won't be exposed, it will not be exposed if the media silences all dissenting voices. Okay, can you guys do me a favor and leave right here on my desk for morning all of the questions, and I'll take more questions on radio tomorrow?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. Please, if you found any value of this, please join us and become a Blaze member. You can do that joining right now. Today, you can get $20 off your yearly subscription. We've never done that before. We would love to have you as a subscriber. We need you as a subscriber. Join our team. Go to the link that is probably on the screen someplace and join us at the Blaze. Thank you. See you tomorrow on radio. Thanks, guys.